I'll go ahead and begin. We have a few intros to get through, so hopefully everyone will join us by then. Once again, thank you all for joining us this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are. We appreciate it. We're going to be discussing talent management and acquisition today, strategies for middle market companies and private equity firms. It was timely last year. It's timely again. Tim, our moderator, has done this once or twice before, so we're definitely looking forward to him and our powerhouse panel kind of giving us the overview of what's going on. But before we get to that, a few housekeeping things. My name is Lena Dobrier. I'm the Director of Operations at Opus. We are a lower middle market M&A focused organization catering to transactional professionals, private equity firms, investment bankers, lenders, independent sponsors. Those are primarily our members. We do 350 events a year now, mainly virtual, although we're back in person at about 50 or so of our events. So looking forward to seeing some of you this year. We have a number of different formats, as you can see, as you've seen, roundtables, webinars like these, Deal Connect, which is our bread and butter, pairing up capital providers and investment bankers for one-on-one meetings, and other pairings as well. So a lot going on all the time. If you're interested in learning more or getting more involved or building out your community in this space, reach out to us. Happy to answer any questions that you have. You can reach out to my colleague Swayze, whose information is here, or anyone on the Opus team, and we'll guide you in the right direction. Today, we will be taking Q&A potentially during the discussion or maybe after, depending on the questions we receive. So as things come to mind, please submit them below in that Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. I will ask that you kindly refrain from posting in the chat section. We won't be monitoring that, but submit all of your questions in the Q&A bubble and we'll get to as many as possible. We do have a couple audience poll questions for you today. We're going to ask one now and the second one later, so stay tuned. But first and foremost, we want to know who you are. This is going to help us understand who's in the audience, who we're speaking to. And as everyone submits their answers, our topic and summary for today is up on the screen for you to review. But let us know who you are, if you're a capital provider on the debt or equity side, service provider, independent sponsor, investment banker, or an owner operator as well. So we'll give that about 20 seconds and then we'll move on to the next. Okay, so looks like 8% capital providers on the debt side, 13% on the equity side, 15% owner operators in the room, 15% independent sponsors, 15% service provider, and 46% other. Curious to know what that other is, but you can only have so many multiple choice. So appreciate you guys participating in that. And without further ado, I want to introduce today's moderator, Tim Lewis of SOUTHFIELD Capital, longtime sponsor, member, friend of Opus Connect, participant. We appreciate you doing another one of these, Tim. It's good to see you, and I'll kick it over to you.
Thanks, Lena. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Looking forward to having this panel discussion. We're very lucky to have two fantastic panelists who can give us great insights on the topic that we've chosen. Before we launch, I'll give you a quick overview of SOUTHFIELD, and then looking forward to hearing Sandy and Jerry tell us about their backgrounds and focus areas. SOUTHFIELD has two strategies. We have a private equity strategy and we have a mezzanine strategy. I'm mostly involved on the private equity side. Both strategies focus on lower middle market companies, which we describe as businesses with 4 to 15 million of EBITDA. On the private equity side, we focus on entrepreneur-built business services companies. Within business services, we're extremely agnostic. We're currently investing out of our third fund. In Fund 2, However, we had invested in industrial services, IT services, insurance services, logistics, and Fund 3, we've invested in a landscaping business, another logistics business, and a business in the franchising space. So just to give you a flavor for the breadth of industry sectors that on the equity side we'll invest in, as long as it's a B2B services business. On the mezzanine side, much more industry agnostic. They will support private equity firms, independent sponsor, or committed capital, entrepreneurs in manufacturing businesses, restaurants, business services, of course. So more agnostic on the mezzanine side. And if anyone's interested in getting more information about either strategies, happy to make myself available. I mean, lastly, I would say that we have been big Opus supporters, always enthusiastic to participate in their events and appreciate their continued focus through COVID and keeping us all connected, and glad to hear that we're starting to have in-person events again. So now on to the more important stuff. I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they can do it better than me. And let's start with Sandy. Sandy, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
I certainly will. Hey, everyone, I'm Sandy Fiaschetti. I'm the founder and managing partner of LODESTONE People Consulting. I'm an organizational psychologist by trade and training, and we're a firm of organizational psychologists who provide basically human capital science for value creation and diligence. So we work with private equity firms and their portfolio companies on diligencing management teams and on all the human capital things that come after that in terms of executive coaching, placing executives, and so on. My history is I spent a couple of years inside a private equity firm as a human capital manager, working with over 24 portfolio companies. But before that, in and out of large industrial, so manufacturing. I'm a Detroit gal. I was in the automotives as well as in large consulting firms before. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'll turn it over to Jerry.
Thanks so much, Sandy, Tim, and Lena, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. Very obviously a topic near and dear to our hearts, so it's great to see interest in it. First, a bit of background about Platform Partners. I'm the Chief People Officer at Platform Partners, and we are a private investment company based in Houston, Texas. And like Southfield, we invest in lower middle market companies. Our intent is really to focus on growth, growing those companies into industry leaders through a combination of organic and M&A growth. We are somewhat unique in the PE space in that we have a perpetual investment structure. And what that enables us to do is really find companies that we have a strong belief in for a variety of reasons to invest in and be patient over a longer term to really invest in growth and focus on their growth. I joined Platform not quite a year ago as the Chief People Officer, and this was a newer role added to the firm due to the recognition of Platform and so many across the private equity industry of the importance of human capital to the success or the opposite of success in terms of some of our investments. And so it's been really great to join this side of things. My previous roles to joining Platform were heads of HR at a few different public companies in financial services and the media industry. And so I really spent quite a bit of time operating on that side, and now have the pleasure of working across our portfolio and helping them really advance their strategic human capital management. So and prior to that, I should add, I cut my teeth as an attorney, as an employment attorney. I've now spent more time on the people side than on the litigation and counseling side, but it informs what I do as well. So it's been great to really switch over to what I think is really smart in terms of running business. I have a real passion for aligning the people and culture strategies to the business strategy to drive outcomes.
Great, thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Jerry, for introducing your backgrounds and focus areas. So why don't we get started? obviously people want to dive right into the topic, but before we do that, even though we're all trying to forget about COVID, I think the administration has declared that in May will no longer be get emergency status. It still lingers, and I think all of our businesses are still sort of challenged by the ramifications of COVID on their operations, in particular on the human capital side. So I think it's important to launch this with a question, and maybe Sandy, you could start off and give us your thoughts on sort of how the human capital function is coming out of the COVID environment, with looming recession and the expectation that unemployment will eventually start to rise.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because I think what I've seen and experienced is this kind of reactionary, knee-jerk kind of approach, which I don't love, right? Like, I think what I saw was companies doing a lot of hiring, and now we're hearing all about quiet quitting. We're seeing layoffs all over the place. I'm feeling like people are having a knee-jerk reaction to, oh, there might be a recession, and making some, frankly, damaging human capital decisions, right? They're, let's cut a bunch of people now, because invariably what will happen is there won't be talent in place to help people make changes to get us through the, as we come out of this. And many companies kind of have this reaction of, well, let's cut the fluff, things like development, and it's not a good, it's a short-term strategy, right? We need to keep developing people in a time like this so that they can help us come out of a turnaround. So I'm a little bit nervous about people getting, they hired too much instead of being planful with their workplace. Now there's a lot of layoffs and a little bit too much on fad and buzzwords like quiet quitting, and let's just stop and take a breath and be planful as we approach human capital is sort of my reaction to that. I don't know, Jerry, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I really concur. I mean, drafting off of that, you see so many of these headlines where I do think some very high profile leaders are almost giving off the aura of, oh, thank goodness we don't need to cater to employees anymore. We can go back to doing what we used to do. And I think that really the smartest organizations that are not only going to survive but thrive going forward are going to be planful, as you said, Sandy. They're not going to overcorrect, and that they're going to be thoughtful. And I'm a big believer that when it comes to human capital, one size doesn't fit all. Even within an organization, depending on the phase or stage you're at, what you may need and what you may need for, now and for 5 years ahead will differ. And you need to be thoughtful about that. You need to look at what has worked and what hasn't. Mm. And, when you think about the hot topic coming out of COVID is the return to office or work from home. And I think there are these polarized, opinions out there of it's just by definition horrible, or it's just absolutely optimal. And I think the truth is it depends. It really depends on what you need at any given time and what it is that, the talent you need to attract, the results you need to drive, and what's working and what's not working. And I think flexibility is really smart for many organizations, and understanding what drives success and explaining that and helping people understand the why, and being really thoughtful and not, going with the pendulum swing. So I think that's really my take in relation to that. And the other, subset of that is that in private equity, the primary focus, or a really strong focus of firms, over 40% of the efforts of PE firms in the last few years have been on human capital. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been a really smart shift. And it's because the studies show, I think that the Bain, global Bain study showed that the number one reason for successful exits is the strong leadership team. And almost tied for first in the number one, almost a very close second in reasons for less than successful exits are the leadership team, the acumen of the leadership team. And I think so, focusing on that, maintaining focus on that is really smart. And that organizations that double down on that are going to succeed. And it might seem very self-serving for, both Sandy and myself to have that perspective because it's what we do. But I really do think, it's smart business. And one other piece that I will add to Sandy's point is a lot of this disruption has meant that the most recent 2022 Gallup engagement survey is showing that folks are more checked out than ever. And the numbers have always been bad. It's always been, only a third of folks roughly that are engaged, but we lost 2% of those folks last year. So only 32% are engaged. Only 32% of employees feel engaged to the mission, vision, value, can see their growth path, and feel really committed. And the actively disengaged went up 2% to 18%. And those are the people that are, real cancers within an organizational culture. And so that focus on the quality of leadership and the culture that organizations are creating, I think, is really critically important. And weaving that through everything you do, I think is what I see being a smart strategy coming out of, these interesting times.
But it's interesting to hear you both say that. I can tell you from Southfield's perspective, I've admitted this in previous Opus discussions, human capital was always on our radar screen, but it really moved more front and center around COVID, and it's opened our eyes to opportunities that I don't think we were doing a good enough job understanding and exploiting. And our intent is to try to maintain the positive momentum that we started during COVID with the orientation around human capital as a key strategic lever. I think the recession is a short-term issue. We have much bigger long-term issues with talent and talent management that are going to survive this recession. So if you don't take it seriously, I think you do it with some substantial risk. That's a good segue to our next broad question before we get into the nuts and bolts. Recognizing that it still needs to be an important part of the strategic focus of the business. Maybe starting back with you, Jerry. What do you see as sort of best in class right now with human capital? So that sort of describing how firms should be thinking about the long-term focus versus maybe responding knee-jerk to some of the fears of recession. And with that, I think we have a slide on the employee life cycle that will help Jerry describe her position.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, when it comes to what is best in class, I think is really a holistic approach, is being thoughtful. Because the way that I view it is that the employee life cycle is this dynamic organism. It's not linear. I think sometimes people think you hire, you train, you onboard, you develop, they succeed, they don't, they transition, and it's a linear cycle. And the way I view it is it's really agile and it's dynamic. And your ability to attract, retain, and engage talent requires you to think about every possible phase and stage of that life cycle, and to be really thoughtful and planful about it, because that life cycle sits within a much, much broader context. It sits within your business strategy, your business imperatives. It sits within your culture and the employee experience, the employer brand, your mission, vision, values. And I think the best in class companies are very aware of this, that if you haven't taken the time to step back and say, who are we? What is our purpose? What is our mission? What will good look like? What will success look like? What is that vision? If we really succeed at executing on our business strategy, we'll be here in 5 years or 10 years, and really tell that story and weave it throughout. And the other really key important piece of that three-legged stool is the values, the behaviors. So the mission, the vision, the values. How do we need to operate in order to achieve our vision, in order to, serve our purpose or our mission? How do we really need to treat each other in the day-to-day? If you're not purposeful about those things, you're going to have a default. People are either not going to know who you are or where you're going, or people are going to operate in certain ways that may or may not be optimal to drive, the execution of strategy. So I think best in class is taking that really holistic approach, taking the time to not only understand where you want to go and how you need to get there, but to weave it into everything you do to make sure that the way that you attract folks is because you have this great employer brand and employee experience across the life cycle, and to be mindful of every single phase, how you hire, how you fire. Total rewards is a piece of it. You want to pay fairly and competitively. You want to reward people for succeeding. You want to manage people's performance. They want to see growth paths. They want to feel connected to something. So I really do think it's that overarching approach. And the tough thing is it's what you do every day. It's not, you don't avoid the cavities because you get cleanings twice a year. You got to brush and floss every day. And I think maintaining a focus on this is an everyday exercise.
And one thing I would add on that, Jerry and I had fun putting this graphic together. I don't think, we're graphic designers, but focusing at least on just how big this big picture is. And one of the things I would say that we talked about when we were preparing for this is sometimes people, operators, firms like to go to the easy button, right? Like if I can put it in a box, if it goes in an Excel spreadsheet, if I can track the numbers of how many people are we sourcing and how quickly did we hire them, that's the easy part about people. Or, let me grab 5 words that sound good, like teamwork and integrity and operational excellence, and let me slap them on the wall after I laminate them. That isn't setting your values. There is hard work in creating these systems. There's hard work and it's messy. People are messy. People are not widgets. So there's hard work around the culture and tying it back to the business imperatives. If you just try to install a human capital or human resources practice and you have oblivion to how does it fit with the cultural imperatives and the business imperatives, you might be plugging a little hole, but you're not getting the most that you can out of this.
It's well said.
Very helpful. And with that, Sandy, could you help us, dive into the topic at hand, which is talent acquisition and talent management, and what you view as best practice in that arena, going forward, and as you said earlier, maintaining some of the positive momentum that maybe we've got during the current state.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First, though, I'd love to see, I think, Marisol, don't we have a poll of what people are doing around talent acquisition first? Let's do that one first.
Let's launch it. Let us know which best describes your current hiring process. Are you spraying job postings online, praying, conducting multiple info interviews, conduct workflow planning and job analysis, or something else? Let us know. Give it about 10 more seconds. I see people are still submitting their response, and then we'll go ahead and share that. Okay.
What did we learn, Lena?
So I'm going to go ahead and share the results here. Looks like 56% something else. 33% are conducting workforce planning and job analysis, and then choosing scientific assessment tools, and 11% are spraying job postings online, praying, and conducting multiple info interviews.
Well, as you might guess, spraying and praying is not exactly best in class. That 33% who are doing workforce planning and using human capital science and assessment, I hope those are some of my clients on the call, because I know that's what they're doing, because that is really best in class. It's being planful, it's using science. I think sometimes that's a surprise to people in private equity, people in finance, just like there's a science around engineering and around finance, there's a way and an approach to people behavior that is measurable. And you can see, does this tool predict this? You can create a job specification based on job analysis done by a professional, where you understand what are the key components of the job, what are the competencies necessary to perform that job, and then you kind of build a recipe of, if these are the competencies I need, then I need tools that measure those competencies. And you can show the linkage between what's required of the job and job performance, getting it through these assessments. And so that is really best in class around talent acquisition. There's a whole conversation around recruiting part of it, right? Like broadening your pool. So many times I think non-best in class is over indexing on experience years, and they have to have a degree. Why? Well, because we've always had a degree. No, if it's not a part of what the job requires, then it shouldn't be a job requirement. And when we broaden our selection pool and start to think about, that server who was fantastic at lunch has the skills and competencies to be a great customer service rep, let me engage that person and pull them into the process. That's best in class recruiting. And then when I say engage them in the process, it's not running people through 8 unstructured interviews where they tell you all about themselves and their strengths and weaknesses, and then they tell the next person all about their strengths and weaknesses. What I mean is, let's put them through some tests that are meant to measure absolutely essential competencies of that job. Let's run them through a structured interview where, if teamwork, problem solving, innovative thinking are key components of that job, we've purposely and intentionally designed some questions that go after those, and we anticipate what the answers should be. And then our clients, when they work with us, they most often for selection end up also doing a business simulation. So much like a pilot would be in a flight simulator, there's a way we can simulate a business experience. And why wouldn't we want to do that before we put people in charge of our companies, right? We can have them write a strat plan for this fictitious company. We can have them answer really tough operational emails. We can have them coach a person on a video call like this and have trained scientists take a look at the behaviors they're seeing. That's the teeth behind great talent acquisition. And that's what predicts success on the job. Not perfectly, right? You mentioned earlier, Jerry, I think about how leadership is what is either the rise or fall of a company. And so putting in place also an assessment of personality and leadership styles. I mean, we know bad leaders don't fail because they didn't know how to work an Excel spreadsheet. They fail because of derailers, like they're arrogant or they were too risk averse and they didn't move quickly enough. Those are the things that you can build into your talent acquisition strategy, focusing on assessment. And then that also helps with DEI, by the way, because we know that solidly created scientific tools that measure job relevant competencies make it more fair for diverse candidates. And because it's a truer picture of what the person does and holds away some of those implicit biases that interviewers frankly have and can't necessarily get rid of. So you can tell I was a little passionate about that one. But I think focusing on scientific talent acquisition is one of the most important things. And you carry that over for development, right? There's no reason that has to stop at selection. You can use that for talent development.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, Sandy, are you seeing companies, because that what you described is challenging. Yeah. There are multiple high bars there for management to overcome. Are you seeing companies training the trainer, training the interviewer, helping make the line executive, line manager who's doing the interview be smarter about what we're looking for versus using the same approach they've used for 20, 25 years and getting the same result?
Yes, absolutely, which is nice. But I will say, not always, right? It seems to be this uphill battle a little bit where, for whatever reason, a lot of people have an armchair quarterback feel about people, right? They understand I should hire someone to go challenge the supply chain and fix the supply chain because I don't know supply chain, but I know people. I'm a person. I have people around me. So I know how to pick people. Well, actually, the research shows that isn't often true, that those unstructured interviews are no better than chance. I often tell people, hey, save you and the candidates a day. Instead of doing these unstructured interviews, flip a coin. So there are still people who hold out and hold on to, I know how to do it, but more and more we're seeing people, because good business operators understand science and data, right? And understand, oh, this is irrefutable. We have to move towards structured interviewing and some of the other assessments. And one thing I wanted to say earlier and forgot is the process I described, like you said, is a lot of bars to cross. We see people often, companies often kind of crawl, walk, run. It's not a one size fits all. There are companies that maybe all of what I described is impossible in terms of their budget, let's say, but they can easily put in place structured interviewing, train their interviewers, maybe use an easy pre-screen, and then other companies will do other things. The point is really be intentional, look at the requirements of the job, train people on what they're looking for and help them calibrate, and move quickly in giving feedback to the candidate, or you will lose the good candidates.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, your question was spot on to what I was going to add to what Sandy shared, Tim, and in that it is going to be a major focus for myself and our team at Platform this year is to really focus on our hiring process and improving our hiring process, because we're fully aligned with the data and our experience that our best possible lever to drive growth and execution of strategy at the companies is through the leadership, through the talent. So whenever we have that opportunity, because there's a gap in terms of a key leader or an opportunity to interview and help a portfolio company hire, we want to make sure that we're really thoughtful. And I think Sandy put it well, taking the time to really decide what that success profile looks like, taking the time to align on how we're going to structure the process and how we're going to make sure we're going to dig in. And I do think that the train the trainer approach is really smart, and it's a really great first step. And it's something I'm going to be spending a good deal of my time on this year, both internally at Platform and with our portfolio companies, is just getting better at that. I love the way you put it, Sandy, in terms of people assuming that they're good at this and saying, I've heard it throughout my career. Oh, but he's such a great guy. Mm-hmm. And that sounds great. And he impressed you in, the hour-long interview, but is he going to succeed at this organization at this time, and not using experience as a proxy for, the real ability to thrive and succeed in any given organization at any given time. And so we're very much focused on that, and realizing that we also like to take the approach here at Platform of taking our own medicine, that if it's a best practice we want our portfolio companies to adopt, then we should also lean in and work on, improving and getting better at it as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah, at Southfield, I think we're coming to the same realization, which is it's shocking, right? That we all have known for some time that the key factor for success in private equity investing is quality management. It is absolutely the most important thing. However, we have never had a really structured approach to hiring those key executives. That doesn't mean we haven't done testing. Testing's been around for a long time, and that we're not doing some of the things that you and Sandy have recommended. But it has absolutely not been applied in the structured manner that it should be. So we're sort of waking up to this as well. Dr. Heal Thyself, right? So
right.
I mean, Jerry, in your experience thinking about talent acquisition and management, is there an aspect that you feel companies tend to overlook? Something that, that isn't, that less obvious, but still incredibly important?
It's a great question. And where I'm going to focus, you might suspect, comes out of my having lived in employment divorce court as an employment attorney in the past, of seeing how things can go badly, but it really is something that can be overlooked, right? We're talking about getting the right people on board and getting the org structure aligned, getting those pieces. But what happens when that person isn't performing or behaving productively? I really think that performance and transition are two areas that often are not done optimally. And it can be from a misplaced sense of fairness, or a misplaced sense of loyalty, or a desire to be nice. And what I see over and over and over again is that if you are not timely, clarifying expectations, holding people accountable for behavior and results, and taking timely action when people are or not meeting those expectations, it's incredibly corrosive to the organization, to the engagement of others. In addition to the fact that it's truly a misplaced sense of niceness. You're not actually being kind to a person by not clarifying what good looks like, by not holding them accountable to it, by not giving them the time and information and resources they need to succeed. I really think that many, many times we don't take the time to slow down and say, does that person even know that they're not meeting expectations? Have we taken the time to make sure that we understand what we need them to do and how they need to operate to get there? And be fair about it. Give them the time, give them the resources. If you're going through transition and you have moved goalposts and you're expecting different things from people, give them the chance to absorb that, give them the chance to learn, engage in that development assessment. And what I've found is when that's done well, it might be the case that the person's just in the wrong seat. And that analysis process, assessment process can really reveal that they can thrive, just might not be in that seat, or they can surprise you. And you think based on how they've been behaving and performing that they can't deliver. They can shock you because you actually clarify what you need and what you don't need. And they all of a sudden meet and exceed expectations. So I do think it's something that is overlooked because most of us don't like engaging in conflict. But this is a really important part of the healthy conflict that we owe to the organizations that we help operate, is to really clarify. And that transitional piece too, it's probably, in my mind, I don't know if you'd agree, how we transition people, I think, is the biggest statement about your culture. And so even though when you know everything you need to know and you need to transition someone, I think to be really, really thoughtful about how you go about that. Ideally, it has been fair. You have been clear. You've given this person every chance to meet expectations. They can't or won't. And how you transition those people out so that the people left behind go, oh, I'm really proud to work here because they did right by the team, because that person wasn't performing, but they did it really humanely. And I think it's just very important to be very careful about that it can actually bolster your culture if you handle that really well.
Yeah, I so agree with you, Jerry. And a couple of things I was thinking as you were saying it, the frustrating part watching something like that happen is it actually doesn't need to be conflict if people take the time up front to be very clear about the success profile of the job and communicating that to the folks for performance management, because then there's no conflict, right? Like I said to you, this is what you requires, and we've had conversations along the way, and you've had bolstering to fix that, and it hasn't happened. That's a totally different experience than, well, Jerry's been an HR leader in companies. She should know what we expect of her here. That isn't, I'm not saying your firm is doing that to you, but but that just isn't fair to people. And the fairness, you're making me think of some research I did a long time ago, the one that put some letters behind my name, that really procedural justice is what people are looking for, not distributive justice. So it's less about they transitioned me out, and it's more about the process and the procedure that was used to do it. The same applies for selection, right? I don't get mad at a company if they don't select me in. I get mad if they use a crazy process to do it.
Couldn't agree more.
Interesting and so relevant. as we think about the company that is maybe private equity backed or entrepreneur backed, but thinking about selling to private equity, what are some of the aspects of the human capital strategy that we think should be really thoughtfully presented in a sale process in order to really bring the strengths of that company to the forefront and make it be a more attractive asset for the potential buyer.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Sandy. And I think ideally, kind of tying back to what we kicked off was, ideally you have a really compelling human capital management story to tell, that you know who you are, you know where you're going, you've been thoughtful about workforce planning and what you need not only for now, but going ahead. And you have, a great story to tell about the purposeful culture you've developed, what you've done and how you operationalize that in the day-to-day. And you are thoughtful about the team, the org structure, the design, fits and gaps, and the leadership acumen you have or you need for the next phase. I also think being really candid, sitting in our seat, we're not expecting that you have it all dialed in, because nobody does at any given time. But if you are actually self-aware and insightful and you go, you know what, we really need an innovation engine for the next phase of growth. And I think we don't have it. Everybody's been here 12 to 15 years, and we probably need to mix it up and add that, skill set in, and we'd love your help with that. So I think not only having a good assessment of what you have, but what your gaps are, what your opportunities are, and where you might want or need help. At Platform, I think we're really partial to organizations that are open to our partnership. We don't come in and run your business for you, but we want to help you. So, coming in with that candor, we're going to see it in a few weeks or months, and the surprises are never great, right? And so I think you really set yourself up if you've done the work and you have a plan and you're open and have, sort of present with that growth mindset, that the fact that you don't have it all figured out is actually, and showing that vulnerability is a real strength, I think, from our perspective.
I would double down on that candor point of view, because when we're coming in and diligencing you, we're going to know this anyway, right? But I think also just knowing, like you said, nobody has it all together, right? Even like if you find yourself in a position where it's like, we're ready to sell and we know we didn't planfully do those things Jerry said, well, then make a plan for what needs to happen and acknowledge those areas. And then you're there. The other thing I would say is, I have experienced companies who focus on the inside of that model that we showed earlier. Like, well, we do rewards and we have an onboarding program, like the tactical parts of human capital. If you expand your lens and talk about the things Jerry was mentioning, you talk about how you purposely cast a vision and created values that made sense and how it's tied to your business imperatives. If you focus on that bigger picture, I believe you will impress the buyer.
Yeah, and I concur with the point about the, being on a trajectory. I mean, we frequently will do technology roadmaps. You could do something similarly on the human capital side, where you're describing your aspiration. You recognize you're not where you ultimately want to be, but you've identified where you want to be, yes, and you can describe where you are in that trajectory. I think that brings credibility yes, to the process, and it's honest, right? Because you're moving in the right direction, but you're not necessarily where you want to be. I want to make sure we have time for questions, so maybe speed up a little bit to, I've just invested in a business. I'm laying out the 100-day plan, which tend to be a little bit more tactical. So there's a tactical component to it, but also tactical within a strategic framework. Again, speaking to the notion of a trajectory. Can you, maybe Sandy, you start off, give us some insights about how you think private equity firms, buyers of any company should think about 100-day planning relative to human capital.
Yes, yes. And I can tell you ways I've seen it done well, right? I'm not just speaking theoretically, but things I've seen done well. First of all, it's out of the gate doing some kind of team session with the board and management, getting on the same page. You know, there was that buying process where, you know, maybe we were all a little bit polite with each other, but let's have a planning meeting where we talk real, okay, we're married now, right? Now, how are we going to work together? Let's bring, again, human capital science in. Let's look at the personalities of the different players and see where are we likely to find friction, just based on who we are, so that we can scenario plan to avoid big conflict, because Jerry told us we don't like conflict. So let's plan to avoid it in a healthy way. And then also setting the culture of the new organization, right? It's so important to have that alignment meeting between the deal team and the management team up front to talk about, here's what we saw in you. What do you see the same way? What do you see differently? So that you can set these folks up for success for their value creation. So I think that's a key component. Realistically, in that first 100 days, there's a lot of looking at, frankly, that management team, right? If you're moving towards something bigger and better, some of those players want to make that journey. They're motivated to do it. Some of them can do it, but not all of them are motivated and can. So what is the plan about bringing different people into the organization or up through the organization? Those are often things I see in the first 100 days. And then just, you know, sort of a tactical, practical thing. Our clients, we do an audit for folks of their human capital process, looking at, pretty easy survey to see, okay, here are the triage points. Like everything I said about big picture and meetings and the executive team and top down is great. But if we find out your payroll system is broken, or you have no way of doing an engagement survey to figure out what's going on through the heart of your organization, then let's put some things in place pretty quickly around that.
Anything that you would add to that topic? You know, obviously, platforms doing the 100-day planning post close. What thought process have you brought to bear on the 100-day planning for your sponsor?
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with Sandy's discussion of really having those early sessions, assessing fits and gaps, and doing an audit and a triage, getting aligned on strategy and next steps, and kind of that trajectory, that plan. That you can't eat the elephant all at once, but when you do that audit and you figure out what are the key levers to growth in the human capital strategy and tactics, what are the key constraints to growth? And then how do we prioritize those? Where in the life cycle are we really struggling right now? And that's what I tend to like to do, is to dive in and help. Is it on the front end because we haven't taken the time to do the planning, as Sandy said, to get real clarity of where we need to go and who we need and what the expectations are? Is it in talent acquisition? Is it in retention? Is it in total rewards? Where do we need to focus and prioritize our time? Because you can't necessarily do it all at once or in Q1. And so really building out that plan with a thoughtfulness to ultimately assisting the business. And I think at times, to be candid, even though everybody says human capital is our most important asset and it's really important and we get it, and I'm a person and I like people and I know people, as Sandy said, we often deprioritize it. And so making sure that it stays top of mind, that you have human capital expertise engaged and at the table and a key stakeholder at the table to inform the business plan, because the talent strategy and the business strategy should be in lockstep and they inform each other. And I think the earlier you have, that human capital expertise at the table and have that voice, I think the smarter you'll be to kind of unlock some of that potential that might be in the org that's untapped at this point.
A quick question: is there one area that you've consistently focused on coming out of the gate, like an employee survey, or having the ELT do the same test so you have a better understanding of how they might operate together more effectively? Is there are there one or two things that always seem to help, get the right kind of alignment coming out of a acquisition process?
Sandy, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think for our clients, it is the management team understanding their operating styles. So, some kind of assessment of that and a meeting around it. Engagement survey often, just because people find it helpful to know what's going on in the organization. The other big one that we didn't mention is like frontline leader training of some kind often pops because it's a high growth organization. There were people who were excellent at doing whatever the company is. So they became promoted, they got promoted, and now they lead people doing it. And no one has ever taken the time to help them understand what leadership is. So leadership training is often a big one. And then I guess lastly, structuring their selection process is a big one that pops up when we're working with companies.
Hey, Jerry, before you answer that question, I want to suggest to the audience, we're getting close to wrapping this up. It would be great to get questions from you. If we have questions submitted, we can try to hit those before we wrap it up. So back to you, Jerry.
Yeah, so very similar to Sandy's approach. I think that what we like to do in those early days is, and even before the first 100 days, right, is to have a really good sense with the deal team internally here, but also with the leadership team of that assessment of team and talent, the fits and gaps, and then what do we need to do about that, right? Are there some key hires we need to make right away? Is there some development we need to do? Is there some, performance behavior coaching that could be helpful? And especially for me to lever myself across the portfolio, it's an assessment of, is there a strategic human capital function within the firm? Very often not, right? There might be someone who's doing the tactical day-to-day HR and they might have tons of potential. So it's assessing that HR team and saying, what do they have? Do we need to add someone? Do we need to supplement them? Can we partner with them and mentor them? Can we get a third-party resource, to come in to help in the near term, to really have that a strategic human capital mindset at that leadership table, I think is the ideal goal. But that's not always, it's not the first priority necessarily, but figuring out where that fits in the priority mix and what we're planning to do about it over time. And then, like Sandy said, the next phase often is just triaging, where is my best use of time in the near term in terms of human capital fits, gaps, issues, constraints, and then focusing on that. And ideally focusing on that to show how it helps drive the business to get more buy-in from leaders who may or may not be bought in, right, to the importance of strategic human capital management. I like to try to get in and get some early wins and some early partnerships and build that rapport with key leaders so that we can truly have that partnership to really advance the agenda.
And one other, just quickly, I can't believe we didn't hit on is the whole change management process with the workforce, because people have this perception of what we were bought by a private equity firm, and maybe they've seen some movies and they have an understanding of what that might look like. And that isn't at all what's about to happen. Well, dealing with their fears, which will be a blocker to any changes you want to put in place, is such an important part of it. And we didn't even say that yet. So needed to say that.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned earlier, open to Q&A. So please post your questions if you have them. And then why don't we close off on a sort of look forward question, Jerry and Sandy, what do you see sort of happening with human capital over the next, 3, 5, 10 years? Where do you think that this part of business strategy is going, and particularly as it's relevant to lower middle market investing and private equity?
You want us to use our crystal balls, right?
Yes. Maybe Sandy, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I have a hopeful view of it, which is that this focus on human capital we've had over the last several years isn't going to go away, that there will be frankly, some education that goes more deeply through firms, through companies that understands what we're all talking about here today, right? That there will be true belief and adoption in the fact that people issues are what drive an organization, and that we can apply structure and science to how we approach solving those problems, so that we don't have to sit in armchair quarterback. I mean, that is why it's a tough nut to crack for so many people, because they think they have to crack it on their own. They think they have to crack it without any research or science behind them, and that just isn't the case. So I'm going to say the hopeful answer is the changes and the evolution will be a deeper appreciation and adoption for that.
Yeah, I concur with that, Sandy, and I'm also hopeful that, you know, that more and more firms come to understand the true value of focusing on strategic human capital management, and that we're able to, I love your point about being more scientific over time, having more case studies and opportunities to tie it back and to show how we've driven the business, because this has been something we've been, you know, focused on and put some resources against, and really showing those results. Because I'm a believer, and I've seen it, that when it's done well, it can be that differentiator. It can be the reason why, when you control for macro factors, industry factors, and market factors, that you can be the one that wins because you've done this really well. And I think continuing to advance that, to win over more leaders and to develop more leaders, candidly, who know how to carry this through and really do it well.
Well, I think your hopefulness is appropriate. I know that for Southfield, it's front and center. We're seeing our most effective CEOs embracing the concepts that you've been describing, and which is different than if I think back 10, 20 plus years ago, in terms of stylistically what was viewed as being the successful DNA of a CEO. So, fingers crossed, but it does feel to me like this is a foregone conclusion. Everyone recognizes how mission critical it is to strategic success. On that note, why don't we wrap it up? If anyone has any specific questions that they weren't able to cover today, please reach out to Jerry or Sandy directly. I'm sure they'd be willing to answer them, and we appreciate everyone's time, and we absolutely appreciate Sandy and Jerry giving us their time today. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you all so much, Tim, for moderating and putting together such a great panel, and Jerry and Sandy for your contributions. I think this was super informative, and I hope everyone on the call today received some value. As Tim mentioned, if you want to reach out to them directly and can't find them online, which I'm sure you can, reach out to me and I'll circulate their contact info. Upcoming events. As I mentioned, we're doing 350 a year, so this is clearly not the full list, but the ones that are coming up the soonest, we're doing our Business Services Deal Connect coming up on February 14th, pairing up capital providers and investment bankers for one-on-one meetings specifically with business services deals. And then our Chicago Private Debt Summit, which is actually in person in Chicago, private lenders and debt raise investment bankers, one-on-one meetings in the morning, and then 3 consecutive panels in the afternoon. It's going to be a full day of content and fun. So definitely reach out if you're interested in joining those or anything else that we have coming up. But I do want to thank everyone for your time and your participation today. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you all in person soon. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.